for the bulk of the study area. So this map just visually depicts the study area. If you're familiar with the southwest area of the city, it's generally south of the new subdivision that's called Wollaston, and then east of Fisher Hallman and north of New Dundee and west of Rydell generally. The new development will support a new community. There have been various technical studies that are ongoing that are going to shape the land use and the policies for this area to guide how growth will occur in this area. One of the studies which you're familiar with is the Heritage Impact Assessment, and a reminder to the committee this evening that your role as Heritage Kitchener is to hear from our consultant on their findings and recommendations, ask questions and provide comments for staff, the consultant, and the internal project team to consider as we continue to review the land use and policies for this area of the city. There is no council motion required tonight for this agenda item. With that, I will introduce, we retained the consultant firm ASI, and this evening, Rebecca Chiara, I hope I got that right, who is a principal with Cultural Heritage at ASI, is here to present the draft Heritage Impact Assessment to the committee.
Thank you, Michelle. And Rebecca, please.
Good afternoon, through the chair. Is the sound okay? Everyone can hear me? Thumbs up? Great. So thank you for having me here tonight. So just as a quick overview, I have a quick presentation prepared to walk us through the results of the Heritage Impact Assessment that was prepared for the Dundee Secondary Plan. I'll briefly go over the context of the secondary plan, but then really spend most of the time talking about the 7 specific resources that were the focus of the work, and key results and recommendations coming out of the study. So just as a very quick overview, this slide provides a visualization of the secondary plan area in its current iteration with proposed general land uses in the area bounded by Fisher Hallman to the north, Drive to the east, and New Dundee Road to the south. And these are currently at this time, the 2 scenarios that are on the table as part of the process. So in terms of just a very high-level contextual overview, so the secondary plan area is generally characterized right now by a rural agricultural land use, but surrounded as well by land use intensification to the north and east. And then within this area that's bounded in red, there are a series of heritage resources that have been previously identified by the City of Kitchener using different mechanisms with different levels of protection. So those 7 resources that are the focus of the Heritage Impact Assessment are 3 roads, Plains Road, Rydell Drive, and Stauffer Drive, all 3 having been classified as cultural landscapes previously as part of previous technical work, with Rydell Drive and Stauffer Drive identified as heritage corridors in the official plan. And then there are a series of 4 properties with residences, one at 1878 New Dundee Road, which is a farmhouse, a previous schoolhouse at 1970 Plains Road, a farmhouse at 271 Rydell Drive that has since been lost to a fire, and one property designated under the Ontario Heritage Act at 500 Stauffer Drive. So this area, has a long history, which I will touch on very briefly right now, but it's been characterized by rural agricultural land uses since it was first subdivided at the end of the 18th century and developed through the 19th century. The heritage resources in green lines are the roads, and they can trace their alignments back to this early period of subdivision. So too can the farmhouses and schoolhouse properties also retain early lotting patterns, of course with the exclusion of the one fronting onto New Dundee Road, which has had some severances around it, so it's a much smaller property than it would have been previously. So in terms of the scope of the work ASI prepared, essentially involved preparation of a heritage impact assessment. And as part of that, we reported on the historical and associative values, physical and design values, and contextual values for each of those resources I just walked through to inform a heritage evaluation for each. The results of that work informs development then of conservation strategies or alternative approaches or mitigation measures as part of the secondary planning process. So I'm now going to talk through in brief the results of the evaluation work and then profile some of the key recommendations resulting. So one of the resources within secondary plan area is 500 Stoford Drive. So this property is already currently designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act with the bylaw dating to 2013. And therefore, as part of our work and as per the provincial planning statement, this is an already protected property. So we've carried forward the existing bylaw as the description of significance for this property. That's in contrast to some of the other properties that we looked at. 271 Riedel Road unfortunately suffered a fire, and the farmhouse that was there is fully removed. So our work deemed that it does not meet Ontario Regulation 906 criteria under the Ontario Heritage Act. Moving forward into some of the roads that we looked at the portion of Plains Road that is within the secondary plan area, focusing on that small segment that is in the northwest corner. Plains Road is an older road, and it had been previously identified as a heritage landscape. However, this portion alone, which we were looking at, we determined does not retain sufficient historical and contextual values any further. Its context has been altered in this one portion, and it does not currently exhibit design value. So it was determined to not meet the Ontario Regulation 906 criteria. Moving forward into the two other roads that are identified in the official plan, Riedel Drive and Stoford Drive. Our work confirmed that these two roads are very interconnected and together meet three of the criteria under Ontario Regulation 906 for historical and contextual reasons relating to their historical value, their current design characteristics, as well as their overall connections and contributions to the surrounding historic road network to the north and east, and their contribution to maintaining the character of the surrounding area. Then moving forward to 1878 New Dundee Road, that is the smaller farmhouse property that fronts onto New Dundee Road, and we determined that it does meet one of the Ontario Regulation 906 criteria with regard to design value as a good representative example of a vernacular farmhouse typology. And then moving along to 1970 Plains Road, the former schoolhouse. It was determined that this property also meets two of the regulatory criteria under Regulation 906 for associative and contextual and design reasons, contributing to maintaining physical connections to Plains Road, and of course its associative value with early education themes and as a representative example of a rural schoolhouse type. So I'll now just briefly pull out some of the key recommendations that resulted from the evaluation work that was completed on each of these resources. So for Riedel Drive and Stoford Drive Heritage Corridors, some key recommendations. that resulted from the work include recommendations like limiting the roadway improvements to maintain the existing cross-section along Riedel Drive, as well as visually screening new development from both road corridors with specific recommendations for tree preservation or restoration zones along Riedel Drive, including consideration of allocating an open space area south of the Blair Creek feature, as well as for proposed new residential uses to avoid frontages onto Riedel Drive and avoiding new vehicular access points. Some other recommendations related to this interconnected heritage corridor also relate to some broader things like limiting new lighting along these roads, striking a balance between public and private access along Riedel Drive, and integrating interpretive and commemorative programming along trails that are serviced by these roads. Moving sort of up Riedel Drive and then along Stauffer to 500 Stauffer Drive. So this is the already designated property that's currently protected under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Building on the designation bylaw that's already in place and considering that, the key recommendations that we made relate to considering a resiting of low-density residential land uses directly south, and that's called out in this diagram here, as well as planting a vegetative buffer along the southern and western edges of the property to visually separate those future land uses, with some recommendations for single row of large deciduous trees along those frontages. And then we also put forward a recommendation that the city may consider amending the designation bylaw, which you can see in the top, bounded in blue, that's a part of the designated property, and there might be merit in looking at that piece of the property in light of the recommendations to see if it still makes sense to include in the governing designation bylaw that currently applies to the property. Moving forward to 1878 New Dundee Road, the work recommends retention and integration of this building and property into the secondary plan, identifying that maintaining vehicular access to the property is a key measure to promote its long-term viability, and as I noted, ensuring that the preferred land use scenario maintains the existing residential building. Then moving to Plains Road in 1970 Plains Road, some key recommendations that flowed out of the work relate to obviously retaining the schoolhouse building at 1970 Plains Road, including commemoration of the historic alignment and historical associations, and considering additional commemoration. And then beyond those specific properties, there were a series of either general or further recommendations presented in the report, a couple of which are included here. So for example, within the secondary plan area, there are recommendations about trail systems being introduced from Riedel and Stauffer Drive, and within school and park uses to the west of Riedel Drive would benefit from interpretive or commemorative programming, public art, or landscaping treatments within those land uses and as part of those trail systems. And then additionally, as part of the work, we brought forward a recommendation for the city to consider with regard to Plains Road outside of the secondary plan area, particularly from Fisher-Hallman to Tressler Road, appears to retain several scenic road elements and is surrounded by an agricultural landscape context. And we recommend that this portion of Plains Road continue to be recognized as a cultural heritage landscape, particularly given the results of the assessment of the portion of Plains Road that is within the secondary plan area. So that is a very quick and high-level overview of the results of the evaluation work and the types of recommendations coming out of it, and that brings us to the conclusion of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. to work on this particular project and make sure that all the heritage is involved and completed and summed up. So I'm going to open this for questions for our consultant now from our members. There must be some questions. See, I cannot believe it. Yes, Preston.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I did have a question about the CHLs and rural road profiles. In your recommendations, you included visual buffers to maintain lighting and so forth to kind of preserve the character of those roads. Do you think those have is there a reasonable expectation for those kind of things to be practicable? You mentioned public safety. For those of us who've been to that section of the city, that roads that have maintained the existing profile no longer function well. Trust the Road being a great example where the development has continued to the south. So do you think those recommendations are more on a compliance side, or is there a chance that they will actually function to preserve these CHLs? Or do we need to approach it other ways? What is your perspective?
Sure, through the chair, and I think I can comment to some extent, but maybe there's some previous implementation work that staff has done in other parts of the city that they'd like to comment on. But overall, the recommendations to maintain the existing cross-section, as well as a lighting, low lighting plan, it's all a matter of, particularly with the lighting, a balance that you implement that kind of measure in a way that is also following the best approaches in design and, crime prevention through design. So for example, you don't want no lighting. So there are different ways that you can introduce a lighting plan that is sensitive to a rural area. Maintaining the width of the road, in my opinion and experience in other places, is achievable and can be implemented, while also introducing other improvements to the road that achieve standards in road design and construction. And again, it's a balance of maintaining a historic cross-section, but perhaps the profile and the grading changes a little bit to improve the sight lines, and you get to that nice sweet spot between preserving character while also meeting, of course, all of the other expectations related to health and safety and best standards in road design as of 2025.
Through the chair, I can also just jump in to say the city has a series of roads in that southwest area of the city that were identified in the 90s. They were originally called scenic heritage roads, and with our, I think, 2014 official plan, we renamed them heritage corridors. They were also identified in the 2015 cultural heritage landscape. Some of those roads have already been closed and converted to trails, and so we would expect to follow the same approach that we already have in place. So the two good examples would be Till Drive from Dewey Mills Road to, I believe it's Stauffer, is now closed. It's a closed road. It's been converted to a path, and there had been a series of requirements done at the time of the adjacent subdivisions to take land and restore and enhance those corridors, both from, as was mentioned, the cross section, but then also the natural vegetation as well as that cultural history piece. The other good example would be, so it's now called Till's Trail, I believe, and the other one that is fully closed would be Grow Drive, which is now referred to as Grow Trail. HIA, and as we continue to work through the secondary plan process, would be to follow a similar process. With that being said, I can jump ahead quickly to mention that in our official plan review, which is an item later on in the agenda, we also talk about the heritage corridors, and as part of that work, we are having ongoing conversations with our transportation staff, our park staff, our maintenance staff, to make sure that what is proposed can be implemented and will be successful. So many ongoing conversations still to build on what we've done, but hopefully continue to maintain that and where we can improve on it moving forward.
Your question answered?
Yes.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I do have a few, knowing the area for a long, long time. In the study, we talk about Blair Creek, and I do know that there was a sub-watershed study done in 1997, and granted, our jobs at heritage, it could be natural heritage, but also we talk about Blair, Bechtel, Baldwin Creek, and these are headwaters with their outlet and the Grand River, and I wondered, was this part of the study at all, to look at these other creeks?
Do you want
Through the chair, so the project manager for this particular file is one of our senior environmental planners, and absolutely some of the technical studies that are being done will look at those, I guess, all natural heritage components of the secondary plan. They would not have been specific to the heritage impact assessment, but other technical studies that are ongoing for that area.
Right. Because we do know that these creeks are cold water, and they are excellent habitat for the fish, and were to guide future development. So I have another question for you, and perhaps this has been decided by another department, but we're talking about scenic riding and scenic, and starting at 400 meters from Dundee Road, and I'm just not clear why we would not go right down to New Dundee Road.
Sure. I'm just going to get a map in front of me to look at that. So the delineation of the boundaries of the proposed historic corridor relate to a combination of what's on the ground today and also what is proposed along within the secondary plan. So the 400 meters brings us to the new future road. And there is a sort of decline in character in that southern portion of Riedel. So in consideration of what the end use plan is, as well as what's on the ground today, it was determined that that was a sort of a right spot to delineate the edge of the Riedel corridor.
Thank you. In the 1980s, the region's EAC Committee, Environmental Ecological Advisory Committee, did do a survey of all the scenic roads in the region, and Rod, Stone, Tilt, in particular in that area, did rank in the top 10 of all the region. And it's interesting that we still see the context of the do hope that this continued on and supported in whatever our future negotiations are as the development takes place. It's very good. There's another area of concern that I have, and maybe I'm not in the right area for this plan, this land. It's hard for me to figure out which is in and which is out, but we have a considerable number of environmentally sensitive protected areas in this area. And along Stauffer Drive, in the southern, to the south of Stauffer, we have a very highly rated one. Is that in or out of this study? The area, I would say, Ryder comes up to Stauffer, and then in that area along there is ESPA. Is that in your
Through the chair. So if you're thinking that it would be west of Stauffer Drive, or sorry, west of Rydell Drive towards Stauffer, that would be outside of, sorry, I said it wrong. If you're thinking of east of Rydell Drive, going down Stauffer towards Tillot's Trail, those lands are outside of the Dundee Secondary Plan area.
Thank you. So I think those are my main questions. Again, I do feel it was a very comprehensive report. Thank you. Are there any other questions that you would like to put to our consultant? Thank you very much. Now I might talk or give our questions to Michelle.
Thank you.
All right. Questions for staff. Well, I do have another question that has to do with the corridor of Ryder Drive. It's, shall we say, sparse on the tree side, but it has the most undulating quality that one would ever find in this region. And I know that our consultants talked about the importance of this particular road and its scenic qualities, how it could be protected. However, what I notice is that the graders are in the property already to the, I guess, the east side of Rydell. So is that out of the boundary then, Michelle?
Yes, through the chair. So the lands that are to the east of Rydell Drive are not in the Dundee Secondary Plan area. They are part of a separate development application that is underway. And so that would be why grading is happening in that area. And as Rebecca mentioned, the existing Blair Creek Road will be extended into the Dundee Secondary Plan area. There's another east-west connector in those lands. And so lands on Rydell that are south of that new connector will look quite different based on existing conditions on both sides of the road as well as the development on the east side of the road.
Thank you. Further, so we've started development, we've started grading, we've identified in this study the importance of the scenic road, and we have many recommendations as to what we can do. Is there any way that some of these recommendations or part of them can be included in this east side of Rydell Drive? Or are we now beyond that, that we're only going to be able to look at the alignment of the road and the west side of Rydell?
through the chair, I'm not 100% familiar with the development on the east side, as it was not my file, but any lands, if they're subject to future planning applications, could be subject to some of these conversations we're having now. But the intent with the Dundee secondary plan is that we would look to conserve from the, as I said, north of the Robert Ferry Drive, Blair Creek Drive extension, northwards towards Stauffer. And at some point, as you mentioned, the natural heritage features, like those areas are protected. And so you will have points where we have like the canopy effect, like the enclosure effect across the road in those northern segments. And so that's what we're trying to achieve. And I believe the consultant has recommended a fairly large visual buffer. We are still talking about that visual buffer and the ability to, make it work. But the idea again was to provide sufficient space for enhancements to be done to add to some of those areas where we have lost some coverage.
Thank you. And yes, I agree. It's a fairly large buffer. And I should say, we need to put it forward and work on that buffer in development area. So, I'm just going to digress and ask for a show of hands if you believe this is a very supportive document of the area. I'm asking the committee for a show of hands in support of this document. Can I see your hands? Thank you very much. And I think it's important that we give this message to our staff because they will be greatly involved in negotiating what happens on this plan. So thank you very much. All right, are there any future or further questions or comments on this? Yes. Preston.
One question in terms of the secondary plan, and perhaps, Michelle, this is something you can put into a broader context for us. Through the consultant's document, we saw that a lot of the background history was this rural agricultural setting. That's what established many of the roots, the farms, the farmhouses. We saw the importance of the scenic qualities of the land, but there was very little carried forward in terms of the agricultural landscape. Many of the heritage attributes are built heritage or the roads, which we could argue is another form of built heritage. But not a lot to do with the fields themselves. We heard the recommendation that the portion of Plains Road further to the west should be conserved in that sort of setting. But ultimately, we're running out of that sort of space in the city, especially as we define CHLs and so forth. And perhaps this is something of other secondary plans. This one does not seem to have room for maintaining agricultural landscape, which has been the root of most of the context we've been discussing. Is that included in other secondary plans? Does the city have a plan for maintaining any agricultural landscapes? Because we know it's such an important part of the heritage of the region, but also of the character of these areas we're discussing.
Through the chair. So there isn't an overarching plan per se to address agricultural landscapes. With that being said, the Culture Heritage Landscape Study did identify the different theme areas, and one of those theme areas was agriculture. I believe there were 3 identified, and I believe all 3 are designated, so they're protected under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. One of those properties is partially in the Dundee secondary plan, so that's 500 Stauffer, which includes a complex of buildings with a farmhouse and drive shed and barn. as well as the rolling topography with the farm fields, hedgerows, pond, forest, and views to and from those historic roads of Carndale and Stauffer. Um, the other, most of our agricultural lands are in that southwest area of the city. We have been working through our listed properties, our municipal heritage register review process. There have been some that we've brought forward through that process and designated. Um, I can think of three off the top of my head, but I believe there are still others that continue to need review. And definitely, we would at one point like to have the conversation that I mentioned with Heritage Corridors for that segment of Plains Road between Fisher Hammond and Trustlow Road. So that section will be proposed to be added through the draft official plan policies that we're working on. But right now it is still in, or it's not in the urban boundary, so we don't necessarily foresee the same threat to those lands. This Dundee secondary plan area had also been outside of the boundary, and so it was some recent legislative changes that brought it into the urban boundary. So it's sort of a balance of, the schoolhouse has lost its context. The 1878 New Dundee has lost some of its context with its severances over time. Unfortunately, we lost 2701 Rydell, which was originally a log house with a stone addition. We lost that to a fire, I believe, in late 2023, early 2024. And so the resource that is partially in the Dundee secondary plan that does conserve some of those rural qualities is 500 Stauffer. So we're obviously thinking about it, but we don't necessarily have one overarching process to review all of them. With that being said, as I said, most of them are in that southwest area of the city, and they're being reviewed as part of our municipal heritage registry review work.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up note to that, our approaches are dealing with mostly individual properties. As you noted, a lot of them have been subdivided, but per discussion, a lot of it is contextual landscapes around that sort of thing. I do think as we move forward with secondary plans and the development of that area, we know that the urban boundary is not static. And so if we would like to conserve a chunk of farmland as representative, will need to be on a broader basis than individual parcels, which themselves are quite fragmented. I know other municipalities, Caledon has an example of the former farmsteads of Chinguacousy that we can look to as an example of that sort of thing, but I do think it's worth bearing in mind as this area of development is partly through, we'll say, market forces and partly through legislative mandates being rapidly developed. So I would just table keeping that in mind as we're going through these processes. Thank you.
I don't know that Preston was looking for a response, but absolutely I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the reference to Caledon for perhaps an example that we can look to. And we can give that conversation of context some more weight when we are doing some of those MHR review properties. Some of them, as you said, have been severed and are no longer representative of a larger farm. There have been others that do, and as we bring those forward, those will be opportunities perhaps to conserve those broader agricultural landscapes. The only other point I'll make is that I think the other two agricultural landscapes are more of what Preston has mentioned, like a fragmented agricultural landscape. So one of them being Steckley Farm and the other being the Woolner Farm. So both of them would have at one point in time had much larger properties with active agricultural practices, and neither of those do today. Have changed to more of a built heritage resource with some contextual pieces, but not much of that agricultural story is visible within the boundaries that exist today. But there is still a story that can be told even on those sites.
Thank you, Michelle. And certainly, again, this is a very supportive and informative heritage impact assessment. And taking from the committee, there's support for it. And I'll say it looks to me like endorsement. So we'll get that with you as you continue on your journey in this secondary plan route. Thank you. Okay, now we'll move on to 4.2, which is a heritage permit application, 49 Michael Street, HPA 2025V019. And Victoria, you're going to make a 5-minute presentation on that. And we do have we have a delegation here to answer questions as well. All right, Victoria.
Thank you. Through the chair, the Development Services Department has received a heritage permit application for 49 Michael Street. This property is designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and is located within the Victoria Park Area Heritage Conservation District. Given its location within the district, the property is subject to the policies and guidelines contained within the Victoria Park Area Heritage Conservation District Plan. The images shown on the screen here provide some context for the location of the property within the district, an image of the front facade of the property, the subject property, and an image showing the property with some additional dwellings to show the context of the streetscape. So the application proposal is for the removal of a one-story rear addition, which was constructed in the mid to late 1940s. The existing location of the addition is shown in the red rectangle on the screen. The existing one-story addition is partially visible from the public right-of-way. And the application also considers the reconstruction of a two-story rear addition in the same location to accommodate an additional dwelling unit in the building. So in reviewing the merits of the proposal against the policies and guidelines within the Victoria Park Area Heritage Conservation District Plan, staff note the following. The addition is proposed to be constructed in the rear of the property in the same location as the existing addition. The addition will be distinct from the historic building given its pre-finished wood treatment. It has a lower roof line than the existing dwelling, and the scale and massing that is subordinate to the existing building. The existing chimney on the dwelling will remain. The windows on the addition are in keeping with the scale and profile of the existing windows on the building. There is a new entrance proposed, but it is at the rear of the building, so no new openings are proposed on the existing heritage building. The colors that are selected for these works, which is mostly brown, are in keeping with colors found within the Heritage Conservation District, and the proposed works will not adversely impact the heritage attributes or character of the subject property, the adjacent properties, or the surrounding area. So based on the merits of the application, staff recommend that the heritage permit application for the demolition of the one-story addition and the construction of a new two-story addition at 49 Michael Street be approved. And I can answer any questions that the committee may have with respect to this heritage application. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Are there any questions for staff on this? We do have with us Ron Rogan and from Rogan Home Design and here to answer questions. Do we have any questions about this? Yes, Councillor Chow.
Yeah, I just had a question about the materials used in the, you said the colors would be similar to the original building, but what are the materials that will be used?
Through the chair. So the material of the cladding is a pre-finished wood that's going to be used on the new addition. So similar to like a hardy board or like a Mybac siding.
So not brick,
Pardon?
not brick.
Not brick. No, it'll be wood.
Councillor Chapman, did you get your answer? Thank you. Any further questions for the delegation or staff? Seeing none. All right. I'm going to read the motion and then I'll ask for a mover of it. So, that pursuant to Section 42 of the Ontario Heritage Act, the Heritage Permit Application HPA 2025V-019 to permit the demolition of a one-story rear addition and the construction of a new two-story rear addition at the property municipally addressed as 49 Michael Street be approved in accordance with the supplementary information submitted with this application and subject to the following condition: that final building permit drawings be reviewed and heritage clearance provided by heritage planning staff prior to the issuance of a building permit. So that's the motion. Who would like to move it? Thank you, Grant. And anyone else? Laura? Thank you. If this report receives unanimous approval from the committee, it will be processed under delegated approval authority. So, you heard the motion, no further questions, all those in favor? Unanimous. So it's delegated authority. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Item 4.3. This one is notice of intention to demolish 11 Irwin Street, DSD 2025-380. And Victoria, you will be doing your 5-minute presentation.
Thank you. Through the chair, the Development Services Department has received a notice of intention to demolish the property municipally addressed as 11 Irvin Street. This property is currently listed on the city's Municipal Heritage Register and has been included on the register since 2014. The above images show its location on Irvin Street between Frederick and Scott Streets, as well as what the building currently looks like from the public right-of-way. The house is a 1.5-story brick house constructed in the Tudor Revival style of architecture, and it also exhibits some arts and crafts features, particularly in the interior. The building was constructed around 1907, and there is a rear addition and garage that were built in the 1920s. The building is currently vacant, and it has been for an undetermined amount of time. The building was subject to a major fire in 2024, which caused significant damage to the interior of the building. It has also been subject to repeated vandalism and unauthorized occupancy. A structural assessment was completed in the spring of this year, and the report determined that the house is not safe for occupancy in its current condition, and that the required repairs would not be feasible within a reasonable budget. As part of the submission for the Notice of Intention to Demolish, a Heritage Impact Assessment was prepared by CHC Limited. The Heritage Impact Assessment provides a detailed description of the building, a full history of the site, an updated list of heritage attributes, and an assessment of the property against Ontario Regulation 906, which is the criteria that's used to determine cultural heritage value or significance. A copy of the Heritage Impact Assessment is attached to the report, but I wanted to provide an overview of the findings regarding the assessment of the property. The Heritage Impact Assessment concludes that the property does meet 3 of the 9 criteria under Regulation 906, being that the property has design physical value because it is a rare and representative architectural style. It has design physical value because it exhibits and it has contextual value because it is physically and visually linked to its surroundings. Based on the evaluation, the Heritage Impact Assessment concludes that the property meets the criteria for designation. However, given the current condition of the building, the designation of the building is questionable. The report goes on to recommend selective demolition as the most reasonable option, despite the property's significance. So under the Ontario Heritage Act, Council does not approve or refuse a notice of intention to demolish. Instead, Council's options are as follows. Council can request further information. Council can receive the notice of intention to demolish, allowing the notice period to run its course, or Council may issue a notice of intention to designate, at which point Council would have the authority to deny the demolition. Staff recommend option 2, that the notice period run its course. While some of the heritage attributes are still intact, many are in poor condition because of water, smoke, and fire damage that has occurred to this property, particularly in the interior. And the interior of the building is compromising the integrity of the building as a whole. The costs to bring the dwelling back up to a habitable standard are not within a reasonable budget and are beyond the scope to make base level repairs. While designation could prevent demolition in the short term, it is likely that the building would continue to sit vacant and under continued threat of deterioration and vandalism. Staff support the recommendation in the Heritage Impact Assessment to undertake selective demolition of the building so that some of the exterior features can be salvaged and repurposed. And staff also recommend that arrangements be made to properly photograph the property prior to demolition. So based on the information presented, staff recommend that in accordance with Section 27.9 of the Ontario Heritage Act, the notice of intention to demolish regarding 11 Irving Street be received as information, and that the notice period run its course, and further that the city arrange to have the property properly documented through photographs prior to any demolition activity on the site. That concludes my presentation, and I can answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Victoria. We do have a delegation. We have Owen Scott and Nader Fadi here to answer questions from the committee if necessary. Are there any questions? Yes, Councillor Chapman.
And this would be for the delegates. So what's the plan of this property? Like, you're going to demolish, and then what are you going to do with it? How long will it sit empty?
We have attached the current plan to the document. So the plan as it is now is to build 6 townhouses. And if I can get the demolition permit, I'm going to start it basically as soon as possible.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Shaw.
I'm going to ask this question, but I'm not even sure that I'm allowed to ask it. I'm going to ask it, so you correct me. Are you the original owners of this building, of this house?
No, I'm not.
How long have you owned it for?
Since last January.
Since last January?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Laura.
I just wondered more about the level of documentation before demolition. I did hear photographs, but I wondered if there was any other reports or anything that would be collected before any demolition happened, and whether those materials would be made available online.
Through the chair, through our process, we typically require just photographs of the exterior of the building be noted, and any particular attributes that have been identified, just so that we have record of what was there on the building. And these photographs would become part of the public record as part of the file.
So if may answer, do have two reports from the structural engineers, right? Is that what you're asking? So those are also attached with the documents. Like I hired two different companies, one structural engineer, and then I think it was required to hire another firm, which was expertise in heritage. They also confirmed the report.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Natalie.
Maybe a bit of a mix for both the staff and delegate. Is this property located in any designated area? I'm assuming no, since it does not have individual designation.
Through the chair, that's correct. It is not located within Heritage Conservation District.
Just taking a look, generally speaking, within the area, there are significant, heritage attributes within that neighborhood. Should the demolition occur and construction happen with the townhomes, would that be considered something that Heritage would look at to make it fit within the landscape of that area, or would it just be approval through the city?
Through the chair, given that it's not located within the Heritage Conservation District and the property does not have heritage status under the Ontario Heritage Act as a designated property, the construction of a new building in this place would not come back to the committee for review. It would be processed at the state level.
Thank you. I have a question for you. Several months back, we gave approval for demolition of a property on Cortland Avenue. Since then, I drive past that once a week. I notice fence around the property, and I notice that weeds are growing in there. And do you have a plan to maintain the property so that it's not an eyesore to your neighbors once the house is demolished? And if you do, what is it?
Well, to be honest, I haven't thought about it. Do you mean like after it gets demolished or up until the time that we demolish it? So,
Well, do you plan to keep the weeds down and the grass?
yeah, I will do that, yeah. But I don't have a certain plan, but I know I'm supposed to be doing that.
Thank you very much.
No
Are there any other questions? Councilor Shaw.
Sorry. We do have a property standards bylaw, so we would have property standards officers attend the site. If it's in disrepair, it has to be maintained.
Well,
The court can say as well.
sorry, just to answer your question, actually, my current plan is my father actually visits the property at least 3 times a week because he's retired. He does visit the property for 2 reasons. One is to maintain the property, and second, because there are enormous attempts to get into the house. So we have to actually keep looking after the house because every time he goes there, there's another attempt. He has to put extra screws, extra nails because people are trying to get in there.
Thank you very much. I'm talking about this demolition. I have another question for you, and I suppose the staff can answer this. The bricks are very fine on this property. I know, I realize it's quite a cost if you were to redo it on the inside, but the bricks are really special. There are some special architectural features on it. Is it your intent to claim any of these things if the house becomes demolished? Do you have any plan to reclaim any of those materials?
Well, I think Owen, you know this better. We got an estimate, like the code, to actually, what do you call it, selective demolishing, right? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
And we'll continue on.
Is that all?
with
Okay.
Are there any other questions? Oh, sorry, one more.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have a question just with respect to the selective demolition. I may have missed it in the report. Can you explain what that would look like, what the process of that is?
Sorry,
The selective demolition, what would that entail?
sorry, I don't understand the question. Can you say that again?
Just refer to selective demolition
Uh-huh.
of the property. Can you explain what that is?
Well, I think Owen can speak for that better.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair. Rather than take a wrecking ball to the house and knock it down the way demolition is often done, the house would be taken apart piece by piece, so the bricks could be salvaged. They are, as has been pointed out, very fine quality brick. There's also some very fine limestone features in the building that can definitely be saved. Yes, it would cost more to do it that way, most definitely, but there's still value in the product that you end up with as well.
Thank you, that's really helpful. And just a quick follow-up. What would be the intention with those materials then? Would they be resold or would they be incorporated into the redevelopment?
It could be done either way. No decision's been made on that.
Thank you. Any other questions for the committee? Thank you very much. I have a question for staff. So, is there going to be a salvage plan with this demolition?
Through the chair, no, a salvage plan had not been contemplated as part of this notice of intention to demolish.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Yes, Grant.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Would a salvage plan be appropriate? Could it be imposed? I certainly don't want to do anything to frustrate development, but just out of curiosity, would a salvage plan be something that could be tied to the demolition?
Through the chair, typically salvage plans are requested as part of development works for properties that are designated under the Ontario Heritage Act. Given that this property is currently listed, this isn't something that we would typically request as part of this process.
Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, just going to carry on with the discussion a bit. Given that the delegates would be happy to work with a salvage plan, can we not? I mean, should we defer this and take it back to staff to work with them to come up with that salvage plan? There clearly seems to be an interest in doing that.
Through the chair, I'm going to take a portion of this. If the applicant chooses to do a development under 10 units, they're not subject to site plan. So they would just have a building permit process and zoning compliance to go through. So in order to implement any type of salvage plan, they would have to be within a site plan application process. I don't know how we would implement the salvage plan through just a straight building permit because, as the owner said, I think contemplating 6 units, so they would not be subject to a site plan application.
But couldn't it be done through a demolition request?
Through the chair, no, that's not something that we can condition as part of a demolition permit, unless it's tied to a planning application, which in this case it will not be.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments for staff? Right then, we'll go to the motion. Oh, yes, Magda, sorry about that.
Thank you. This is maybe jumping ahead a little bit, but the new draft policies that we are going to be talking about shortly, I believe possibly mention sort of incorporating more like, I can't remember the exact wording, but I think with listed properties sort of making more of an effort to do salvage. Is that the case, or is that still in the future proposed to be limited to designated properties? Does that make sense? So if I understand you correctly, you're asking if these draft policies are going to require salvaging as for listed properties in the future because of the draft review policies that we have in front of us. I think, jumping ahead a little bit, I think the draft policies speak to salvaging resources in general. That being said, the situation for this is a bit unique in the sense that, and Victoria could correct me if I'm wrong, there is no site plan application or planning application attached to this. We would typically apply those policies when there is a planning application, and if not, try to work with the homeowner, but I think the situation here is a bit different.
And through the chair, I'll just add to the other piece of that puzzle would be, this is not a heritage permit requesting demolition. It's the notice an owner is required to provide us if a property is listed and they're proposing demolition. And so the Heritage Act lays out essentially the options which Victoria went through in her recommendations. And so the Act does not give this type of notice the ability to apply a condition to that notice. So it's simply, we have the opportunity to either designate or to let the notice period run its course. But we don't have the authority to apply conditions to the recommendation. So as both Disha and Victoria and Sandra mentioned, if we had a active heritage permit because it was individually designated or in a heritage district, we could contemplate those types of conditions. And if there was a planning file associated with it, we could contemplate those types of conditions. But if they only need a permit from our building department, we have no mechanism to require that.
Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, okay, so I just wanted clarification then. Our option here then is to accept this demolition permit or to call for designation. Is that, do we discuss that here, or is that what would council have to discuss?
So the committee here can consider the three options that were presented to request more information, to let the notice of intention to demolish run its course, or to recommend that council designate the property.
Okay, and my second comment or question has to do with the state of the exterior of the house. I mean, there's a focus on the interior of the house, but that's, even if it were to be designated, it's not the interior features that are being designated, it's the exterior of the house, which in the photos we see, the house looks pretty intact from the outside. So, you know, people will gut their house and start again and carry on. Is this an opportunity to have the house gutted in the interior and to carry on maintaining conserving the exterior of the house?
Through the chair, given that the interior has been so severely damaged, comes into question whether the interior work could be done in a way to allow the exterior of the building to continue on as it is now. The fire did destroy a lot of the interior features of the building, including a significant portion of the second story, the roof, and the garage. Given the works that would be required to rehabilitate the interior, the financial costs were determined to be quite high. Yeah, the interior of the building calls into question sort of the integrity of the building as a whole, given the works that would be required to bring it back up to a habitable standard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Grant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question or a point of clarification. There's no decision being made on this, right? It sounds like Councillor Chapman's referred to demolition permit, but it sounds like this is just for information. Is that correct?
Through the chair, the decision of the council would be with respect to the three options that were presented. So the motion that could be passed by this committee would be to request further information from staff to allow the notice of intention to demolish run its course, or to recommend that council designate the property.
Alrighty. Thank you for that information. Then, with that information, when it's the appropriate time to do so, I'll put the motion forward for it to run its course.
Sorry.
With the information of the three options, I believe they're looking for motion potentially for the.
You'd like to amend the motion?
What is the current motion? Oh, okay. Yeah. Also, then I guess I will support that when it's the appropriate time to do so.
The question, you know, when somebody comes in with, oh, it's going to cost me $1.5 million to redo this house. I have concerns. You know, like a lot of people say, why should we, you know, take on a heritage house or heritage homes? Look at the price it's going to cost. And when you hear these figures, you say, maybe they have good reason. And I just wonder, when something comes in like a quote like this, it comes in to staff, do you have someone within the department that reviews the costs? Is that part of it?
Through the chair, we don't have anyone in the department that specifically is looking at the cost of these types of works. No.
So I will go to Sandro. Do you see anyone within the department when someone comes in that's saying that they need to, you know, it's going to cost this much, my consultant says it's going to cost this much, and it's not economical, it doesn't make sense. Is there anyone within the department that could evaluate that and give a second opinion from our part? Sandro?
Through you, Chair. We would look at it from a subject matter expert lens. So there are people on the team and within the department who have a significant amount of building knowledge. We would also then, if we wanted some further consultation, reach out to building staff to see if the quotes are in line. And we would also potentially reach out to the construction industry or a subject matter expert to look at that. So these quotes do come in, they're looked at by the team, and if there's further gaps or we question, we will reach out and look at the quote in further detail.
Thank you very much. I think we need to start to look at some of this, these proposals when they come in. All right. Seeing no further comments here. Oh, yes. Preston.
This is just a general comment for the record. I think the discussion and the recording will show that there is no legislative mechanism to enforce salvage, but it is the interest of the Heritage Committee that salvage be done, and I think that can be shown on the record as a matter of good faith in terms of where our ultimate recommendation is.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to read the resolution. That in accordance with Section 27 of the Ontario Heritage Act, the Notice of Intention to Demolish received on August 28, 2025, regarding the property municipally addressed as 11 Irving Street, be received as information, and that the notice period run its course. And further, that the city arranged to have the property municipally addressed as 11 Irving Street properly documented through photographs prior to any demolition activity. All right. Is there someone who would like to move that? Grant, you would. Any other comments? All right. those in favor of the motion? All right. So if this report receives approval from the committee, it will go to council for approval on October 20, 2025. Any further comments? Thank you. We're now going to go to 4.6, Kitchener 2051 official plan update. And Michelle Drake and Diksha Chowdhury will provide a 5-minute presentation.
Through the chair, I will actually be giving an overview of the project and the cultural heritage policies, and Michelle and Diksha are here to assist with questions and comments from the committee. So this evening we're presenting an update on the draft Kitchener 2051 official plan to let the committee know what work has been done since the last time you were updated on this project. To recap, Kitchener's official plan is the policy framework that guides short and long-term development across the city, and staff are updating the official plan to determine how the city will grow and evolve over the next few decades. This project started in the fall of last year through a community engagement launch party and the formation of a community working group to help guide the process. Technical studies have been completed, and heritage planning staff have been updating existing policies related to cultural heritage conservation and drafting new policies. Today we are providing a high-level overview of the draft cultural heritage policies, and we'll be looking for discussion and feedback from the committee. So before going over the policies, I wanted to remind the committee of some of the key areas of focus that were determined through a Heritage Kitchener Committee survey. So some of the priorities that were looked at was with respect to management of changes, sustainability and compatibility in design were identified as priority areas to be addressed through policy development. The committee identified costs associated with heritage properties, a lack of knowledge around conservation and current processes as some of the barriers to be addressed through policy development. And the committee identified connections between heritage and urban design, material waste and reuse, educational benefits, and placemaking and placekeeping as areas of focus for the draft cultural heritage policies. So I will be providing a high-level overview of the intent of the draft policies, specifically focusing on the policies that have been drafted to address these priority areas, barriers, and focus areas identified by the committee. The full draft policies are included in attachment A of the staff report, and we can pull them up on the screen as the discussion ensues after the presentation. So as the name suggests, the draft general policies apply more broadly to heritage properties across the city. We have made some minor changes to existing policies to strengthen and clarify content around identifying different types of resources, the mechanisms that the city can use to conserve heritage resources in the long term, and the tools that are available to enhance public knowledge. There are existing heritage policies around decisions being consistent with applicable legislation and standards and financial incentives. These policies continue to be included in the draft document. With respect to new policies, the new draft general policies provide for a proactive approach, integrating heritage resources into new developments, providing greater direction around the protection of heritage resources against demolition and neglect, and an increased responsibility on the city to identify and manage city-owned resources. These draft general policies are included on page 1 in attachment A to the report. Staff are proposing a new section within the heritage policy section regarding design with heritage resources. These draft policies are intended to outline expectations and minimum design requirements, including a higher design standard for developments incorporating cultural heritage resources, encouraging the adaptive reuse of heritage properties, using light and commemorative features as tools to conserve and enhance heritage resources, and to discourage the retention of singular facades. And these draft policies are included in full on page 3 of the attachment to the staff report. The existing heritage section of the official plan does contain policies regarding demolition, but staff are proposing some new demolition policies, clearly stating that there will be a presumption against demolition. However, recognizing that demolition is sometimes unavoidable, we have drafted policies to include direction around the appropriate salvage and reuse of materials, requirements for commemoration plans, and greater clarity around submission requirements for notices of intention to demolish, as well as archival documentation requirements when demolition is slated to occur. And these draft policies are included starting on page 4 of the attachment to the staff report. And finally, archaeological matters are a new responsibility under the purview of the city, requiring clear direction around early identification of areas of potential and the management of identified sites. The draft policies for archaeology include direction around the submission of required studies on and around archaeological sites, as well as the requirement for consultation with the Indigenous communities. Staff would also like to note that an archaeological management plan is identified as future work, and through this plan, contingency policies will be developed, which would include how to address the management of archaeological resources in emergency situations. And these draft policies begin on page 7 of the attachment to the staff report. I'm now going to turn it over to Michelle and Deeksha to discuss the draft cultural heritage landscape policies that have been developed as part of a concurrent project with the official plan.
So through the chair. So in addition to the work that Deeksha and Jessica, who is no longer with us, but then Victoria, has jumped in the work that they've been doing, Deeksha and I have also been reviewing the cultural heritage landscape policies as well as drafting new policies. So a little bit of background information to remind the committee. So this work for cultural heritage landscapes started with the Historic Places Project back in 2014. At that time, when the document was put forward to council in 2015, 55 landscapes were identified as significant cultural heritage landscapes. The provincial planning statement was updated and changed in the fall of last year and had some new direction with respect to developing and implementing proactive strategies for the conservation of cultural heritage resources, as well as the obligation to consult early with our Indigenous communities. And then between when the study was approved in 2015 and where we are today, there have been 20 of the 55 cultural heritage landscapes have been added to the existing map 9 of our official plan, which is a map that shows the cultural heritage resources. So then what has happened between essentially this year and moving into next year is this ongoing body of work to continue to implement the findings of the original study. We did bring a survey to you earlier this year to hear some of your thoughts and opinions. We reviewed other municipal official plans across the province to understand what policies are already out there and what strategies are being used to conserve them. We undertook research specific to the 4 neighborhood cultural heritage landscapes that we focused on, and then we undertook some engagement. So we have had the opportunity to reach out to the First Nations and open a dialogue on cultural heritage landscapes. We hosted a public open house in September, and we also hosted 4 walk shops in September. Those walk shops were in the Carndale neighborhood, the Pandora neighborhood, the Queens Boulevard neighborhood, and the Rockway Drive neighborhood. I do just want to point out and thank, I won't call you out, but some of you did attend the open house and some of the workshops, and I did just want to thank the Heritage Kitchener members who, took that extra time out of their schedules and joined us in those public forums to hear the dialogue that happened. We've also had an Engage Kitchener page that's connected to the Kitchener 2051 new official plan project. And just kind of below on the screen, you'll see that's sort of the button that one can click to get to the survey questions pertaining to the Cultural Heritage Landscape Review. And then we are coming back to you today with the first draft of our CHL policies. That draft does not include the work related to the 4 neighborhoods because the survey for that work closes tomorrow or Thursday. I can't recall officially. So we will wait to hear all of the voices and then review the feedback and draft those policies for release later this fall. So our proposal is to add 27 more CHLs to MAP 9 or whatever iteration that may be called in the new official plan. The theme areas are related to guidelines that we would want to be followed where development is proposed on or adjacent to CHLs, our obligations to engage with our Indigenous communities, information related to the development process in terms of what types of studies would be required and when, heritage corridors, which we spoke about briefly with the Dundee secondary plan topic earlier this evening. So there are a number of heritage corridors that are in the existing OP. We will add those that are not already in the existing OP and that they will be subject to a similar policy framework where in most cases we are looking to conserve the historic alignment, the historic road profile, and some of the associated natural vegetation that provides the scenic quality, the design value of that area. Another area relates to proactive strategies, and so that comes from the provincial planning statement obligations to consider policies and proactive ways to conserve cultural heritage landscapes. We have some policies that speak to the Grand River, and then secondary plans, like the Dundee secondary plan would fit into that area of the work. So in terms of next steps for the cultural heritage landscape work, we will be considering the feedback we've obtained from First Nations, from the public open house, from 4 workshops, and any other communication, whether that's through the online engagement or email, as well as the comments we received from the committee today. We will draft the CHL policies that will relate to those 4 neighborhoods, the Carindale, Pandora, Queens, and Rockaway. And then the full draft of the CHL policies will be shared as part of the broader Kitchener 2051 project, which is the new draft official plan, which is intended to be released later this fall to the community. I have the CHL policies available on slides if we need to speak to them. I know that we can also pull up the Cultural Heritage Resource document that Diksha and Victoria are familiar with if we need to refer to any of the broader Cultural Heritage Resource policies. But with that, that concludes my presentation, and I believe Victoria's. And I think at this point we were hoping to hear obviously comments, questions, concerns from the committee that we as staff should consider as we finalize these draft cultural heritage resource policies, which also include the draft cultural heritage landscape policies. And I will have to step out shortly, but both Disha and Victoria will be here to respond to any questions.
Thank you. And we have questions now for the planners. Natalie.
There was mention specifically with the open houses, the walk shops, and community engagement with First Nations. Is that an ongoing thing that's planned, or was it kind of a, oh, we got the feedback we needed, or are there any future ones planned?
Through the chair, can I just clarify the question? Were you asking specifically about First Nations or the walk shops or both?
I guess, yeah. Are there going to be more open houses, walk shops for the community, and will there be also like continued engagement with First Nations? Like, is it an ongoing thing for both?
Through the chair, so there will be continued ongoing dialogue with the First Nations related to the broader OP project as well as cultural heritage landscape conservation. There are no additional open houses or walk shops planned specifically for the cultural heritage landscape project, but additional feedback can be provided when the new draft of P is made available later this fall for full public comment from anyone.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Grant?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have feedback. I don't know if it's the appropriate time for that. Yeah, for sure. All right. So in reading through the policies, I did have just one thing that I noticed that was maybe a bit of concern, and that is I feel like there was a lack of reference to housing or other priorities within the official plan. Now, I certainly appreciate that housing will be included in a separate section of the report, but I suppose one of the things recently that happened on Heritage Committee and ultimately ended up going to council was the demolition of a property on Queen Street North in front of the library. And there was a lot of debate at council, and it ultimately got deferred. Councillor Michaud even spoke up, and not to pin housing or the sort of in this development was for affordable housing or supportive housing for folks with disabilities. That was the demolition was voted against here and went to council and was approved. And I was wondering if there's ways to incorporate in the policies measures to maybe avoid some of these contentious situations. And again, not to pin housing against heritage, but there's a policy that reads in here that the city will make decisions with respect to cultural heritage resources that are consistent with all applicable legislation. And this might be more appropriate in an email, but I'm wondering if there could be a policy that would say the city will make decisions with respect to cultural heritage resources with an understanding of, you know, X, Y, and Z. And in this case, I'm thinking maybe of affordable housing. I wouldn't think this policy would be used as like a blanket statement or like a get out of jail free card that you can demolish something. The developer would just be able to say, well, we're in a housing crisis and so we need to build housing. But in particular instances where they can demonstrate that there is affordable housing, that the need is there, that there's policies in the heritage policies that recognize that need, right? And again, not to pin them against each other, but I've often spoken before about how heritage can sometimes be used as a tool of exclusion, right? And I think that is another missing piece in here to kind of make that recognition and be able to have a little flexibility within the heritage policies where that need is really severe in the community.
Staff, do you have a comment?
Through the chair, I can share and others can add if I've missed any. So the focus of the heritage section is on those obligations related to heritage matters. I would say as professional planners, we don't ignore the other pieces of the puzzle, and anyone that's bringing forward a proposal is required to read the official plan in its entirety. So it is intended to be read in its entirety. I do know that there, and hopefully it's okay to share some of this, I do know that there is intention to make sure there are references between sections so that will help people make those links. So I don't know that we would explicitly add a policy in the heritage section, but we would likely refer to those other objectives that are in the housing section of the OP and vice versa. And that would apply to other topics as well, where we think we want to make sure that even though they should read it in their entirety, it might be helpful to just add that extra reminder to refer to both areas of the OP.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. That's really helpful, and I would say at a minimum that would be really important to put those references in there because there was no mention of housing within the heritage policies. Again, I understand that it's a discrete separate section of the official plan and that those will be covered in different sections. But yeah, I think those links are really important.
Through the chair, if I can also add to what Michelle said, the policies within the heritage section are not meant to guide land use. I think it's a common thing that we come across, as Grant said, where housing is sort of pitted against heritage. I think both can coexist. The purpose of these policies is to make sure both can coexist. I think on some of the workshops we heard some of the members talking about how the building can look the same but have a different use. Whereas, in a single family neighborhood, you can have duplexes and triplexes, and staff are aware of that. So, purpose of these policies is to make sure that we can meet the different needs of the city, while making sure that the interests of the city are also conserved, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Sorry, I left my mic on. Good question, Grant. Good. Thank you for posing that. Any other questions on this report? Yes, Magda.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a couple questions. One was the mention of commemoration and programming. Is this now required? And if it is, well, whether it is or not, how do you navigate like who is responsible for that, and what is the content and form of commemoration when that comes up? Through the chair, so commemoration mostly right now is done through planning applications. So if we have site plan or PZBA, one of the conditions of approval is for them to submit a commemoration plan, and that's mostly the onus of the developer working with a heritage consultant. So essentially, they would submit a plan that would be reviewed by staff, make any changes if needed, and that gets implemented through the site plan process. The purpose of the draft policies in this case are to strengthen the commemoration policies that we already have, and to make sure that there are different avenues of commemoration. I think a lot of the times the commemoration is the go-to is sort of installing a plaque, and that's about it. What we're trying to achieve through these policies is to have some creative outlets for that commemoration or different avenues that developers and consultants can use to sort of commemorate a piece of building property, whatever it is, or if there's any historical value.
Through the chair, if I can add as well, the city has also developed a terms of reference for what the contents of these commemoration plans would include. And so, yeah, as Deisha mentioned, as part of the site plan process, we would review these reports and then ensure that what is recommended through those plans would be implemented through site plan.
Thank you. I also had well, I just want to add a voice of support to number 2 under design with heritage resources. I think very relevant to the conversation we were just having earlier. That cultural heritage resources that are underutilized or vacant should be adaptively reused. I wonder if you could talk about like whether that takes place in any form currently. How is this different from what's happening now, and how would it be enforced? As stated. should adaptively reused, but how are we gonna make it happen? Thanks. Through the chair, so I think what we're trying to achieve through this policy is sort of goes back to that conversation about demolition and how Victoria was talking about that there should be presumption against demolition. What we're hoping to achieve is before we arrive to that conclusion that applicants and developers can look at an underutilized or a vacant site and think about ways how they can sort of incorporate that building, or in this case not vacant, or that building within its development concept. We have, as staff, have always tried to work with developers in trying to incorporate these sites when they are working with them. So sort of the intention of this policy is for them to think about something first rather than coming to the conclusion of, you know, we need to get rid of this building to provide another building in its place. That also goes to speak to some of the carbon emissions policies that we've introduced. We're trying to look at what would be the sort of a comparison of both. So if you were to demolish a heritage building versus building a new one, what would be the impact in terms of carbon emissions, and if that can go further in the conversation. So in terms of how we achieve that is something that we still have to see. I think these policies are pretty draft, but that is the intention behind introducing them. Thank you. And I'll just add to tie into what you were saying. I haven't thought this through very well, but let me try to just say that there's a lot of conflicting kind of forces, and from a developer's perspective, it might not be, there might be zero motivation to, say, conserve a few single family houses when they could be left to rot and then a 30-story tower could be built in its place, which is the condition we have in certain areas of the downtown. I'm not arguing in any particular direction. I'm just saying it's a complicated issue, and I'm not sure if that can be further addressed in the policies, because of course we want to see more housing, and so it's like, how much do we sacrifice on that altar? And also considering, you know, like, yeah, 30-story tower is more housing, but it's, you know, often kind of worse quality, tiny condo units and so forth. That's not directly related to heritage, but it's sort of the way that heritage is seen as an enemy of development and or of housing. So yeah, just to bring that up and to think about how that can be sort of handled in a productive manner, potentially through policy. Thank you.
Any other? Just a comment, observation. It's mentioned that we have comprehensive commemoration plans to effectively recognize significant cultural heritage resources that have been or will be lost. And I wondered if there will be some kind of definition or flushing out as to how we effectively commemorate effectively. And this comes from a comment standing in line at the market for some coffee. These two young people were talking about living in that high-rise apartment that replaced the Trinity United. And they said, oh yeah, there's a plaque in the corner, you know, it talks about a church. And I'm thinking, it really doesn't do effectively commemorate what that church was all about. So I wonder if there's some way that you can incorporate more of a broad definition of the effectiveness and how to commemorate. There might be just a rationale for demolition when they come in and say, well, I can put up a plaque and sell it. So that's one comment. The other thing that I think we need to be mindful of how we put this in our document. It is recognized that demolition is not always avoidable in these instances. And I'm sure that there are these planners, and we've heard it this year, will seize upon that statement, you know, with glue on the ends of their fingers and say, we have to, you know, it's unavoidable. So I wonder if there's a way to acknowledge it but reword it. Now, if there are any other comments, generally I would say I am impressed with the content and the information that is here and how we're fleshing out and that putting some more information and meat on the bones of this document to make it more fulfilling. So I don't know if there are any other comments. Generally, do you want to shake your head or hold up your hand if you think it was fairly supportive in what you have and wish that staff would continue on? Do you want to show us your hands to that you'd like them to continue, the staff to continue on with our comments? Thank you. Generally, so you have our support then to continue on. Thank you. All right. Then you're seeking feedback on that, and so 4-4 is Mike and Pat Wagner Heritage Awards 2025 update. DSD 2025-392. Deeksha, would you like to give an overview of this? And that's it. We go forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, in the interest of time, I'll try to keep it as short as possible. So we have an update on the Mike and Pat Wagner Heritage Awards. As you may recall, earlier in the year, the selection process for these awards underwent changes to become more streamlined with the Kitchener Great Places Awards. This year there was a panel in place, and our chair was a member of that panel, and so that panel considered 5 projects for this award category. We had 97 to 99 King Street West, the Sudbury Public School, the Governor's House, Ophelia Vibe Development on Queen Street, and St. Mark's Apartment Place. So the project for 97 to 99 King Street West included a facade rehabilitation. The building is designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and the work was done to restore the facade, which included meticulous repair of the brickwork and the restoration of the cornices. The next project that was considered was the facade rehabilitation for the Sudbury School at 171 Frederick Street. This building is also designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The work included extensive rehabilitation of the building, including the replacement of all the windows in the same style as existing, and repair of the brickwork and interior archways. The third project was for the Governor's House located at 73 Queen Street North. During the review of the property, it was found that the front porch was deteriorating. The work included the facade restoration with a focus on that front porch. The columns were repaired and replaced in kind, matching the existing porch in materials and style, including colors, therefore conserving the heritage value of the home. The brick beneath the porch was also repointed and repaired as necessary. The fourth project was an adaptive reuse project on Queen Street. The Ophelia Vibe development included the construction of a 10-story rental unit building behind 2 homes that were designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. These properties were adaptively reused in the project, and they were included within the new 10-story development. The last project that we looked at was the St. Mark's Apartment Place. This building is included on the inventory of historic buildings. This project involved the adaptive reuse of the church for affordable housing. An addition was also built, which you can see towards the left on this picture, to accommodate 43 affordable housing units. So this was an item for information. There is no recommendation for council required. The winner has been chosen and will be announced on October 29th at the Kitchener Great Places Awards ceremony. I will be forwarding a link to register through Mariah, and the committee is invited to attend this function. That concludes my presentation. I'm here for any questions.
Thank you, Diksha. Any questions for Diksha on these awards? Great projects. Thank you. All right, we'll go on to our last item, 4.5, status updates, Bill 23, Municipal Heritage Register review. Diksha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Apologies, the property number is missing from this slide. We only have one property for review, which is 85 Strange Street. This property is located on the west side of Strange Street between Strange Street and Glasgow Street. The property meets 4 out of 9 criteria and is recognized for its design, physical, historically associative, and contextual value. The property includes the main church building and also an associated rectory building. This property is recognized for its design value, as it is a representative example of the neo-Gothic architectural style. The church features a rectangular plan, red brick construction, one large Gothic arch window per bay, buttressing between bays, and large Gothic stained glass windows above the front door entrance. The historic and associative value relate to the original and continued use of the building as a church. The St. John's Church was the fourth church to be constructed within the city, necessitated by the growth of the city in 1937. The parish of approximately 220 families living within the boundaries of Highland Road, Victoria Park, and Waterloo, and King Street were formed in May of 1937 by Reverend McNally. Father William F. Gleason was the first pastor of this church. This church also has contextual value because it is physically, functionally, visually, and historically linked to its surroundings. The building is in its original location and has continued to serve as a church since it was built. In particular, part of its contextual value is tied to the adjacent St. John's Catholic School, which was reviewed as part of the MHR program, I believe, in August. Based on staff's evaluation, staff is recommending that designation be pursued for this property. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Diksha. Any questions on this item for Diksha? Seeing none, and with no delegations, so I will read the resolution. That pursuant to Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, the cultural value, heritage value, or interest be recognized and designation be pursued for the following property, 85 Strange Street. Who would like to move this? Natalie. Any questions on this? All those in favor? Carried. And so this report receives, Councillor Chapman, you're abstaining. So this report did receive unanimous approval from the committee, and it will be processed under delegated approval authority. Thank you. All right. We'll continue on then. Heritage permit application tracking sheet. Any questions there? Yes, Grant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually have a quick question just to make it clear. I was wondering if staff could provide some information about what the list of historical buildings, or I'm not exactly sure what the title is. You said that St. Mark's Church is on this list, but I don't see it designated within the envoy, so I just want clarity on that.
Through you, Madam Chair, yeah, it's included in the inventory of historic buildings, which would not be available, I think, on the public mapping, but we can, if you want a list, we can provide you with that.
Thank you, Disha. Any other questions? Seeing none, who would move to adjourn the meeting? Laura will. Thank you. Have a good October, Thanksgiving, and see you in November.